Okay, so here we are. I am Notisha Massaquoi, and I'm very proud to say that I am a board member of CANFAR. And today we're going to be speaking with Reverend Jeff Rock. And it's been fantastic working with you, Reverend Rock, on the CANFAR board. And it's wonderful that we're going to have this conversation during Pride Month. And I'm really looking forward to hearing all about your work and some of the things that we need to be thinking about, particularly in our work with the LGBTQ2S plus community. So how about if you start off by telling us a bit about who you are and your journey and the work that you're doing currently?
Gladly, Notisha, and it's a pleasure to serve on the board of CANFAR with you because you've had your hand all over HIV and AIDS work in our province of Ontario and in the city of Toronto and really across Canada for years. So thank you for all you do. So I'm Reverend Jeff Rock. I'm a senior pastor at the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto. We are in our 48th year. It was founded in 1973 as an LGBTQ congregation. We were a church for LGBTQ people here in Toronto when it had just been decriminalized. It started primarily as gay and lesbian folks, then more and more trans folks and allies. We're really multicultural, multilingual, and even multi-religious. We call ourselves a vibrant, inclusive, and progressive faith community and human rights church, which is a big, long title, but it's important because, not only are we a faith community, we also have the Triangle program, which is a LGBTQ high school in partnership with the Toronto School Board that meets in our building, and it's existed for like 27, 28 years. And then we have a refugee program that assists LGBTQ refugees both to be settled in Canada. We're the only LGBTQ exclusive sponsorship agreement holder with the federal government, but we also have an asylum seeker program that supports a whopping 800 LGBTQ asylum seekers per year. So, the needs in the LGBTQ community, perhaps for somebody who's cisgender and white like myself, aren't that high. But when you look at racialized people, trans folks, immigrants and refugees, young people who are coming out, there's still a lot of work to be done. So that's just an introduction of who I am. But how did I get to this place? The interesting thing is when I was about 12 years old, my parents gave me a medical textbook, an anatomy book, because I was going to be a doctor. Like it was my mother decided when I was a kid I was going to be a doctor. And then when I came out as a teenager, I thought, I want to work in HIV and AIDS. So I actually went to university and studied microbiology and immunology, planning on going to HIV/AIDS work. God had some different plans for me, but I've really maintained a real passion for the work of HIV and AIDS, both from a science perspective, but also from a social perspective. And I feel this work really brings those two sides of myself together. And that's why CANFAR is such an important organization for me, right? Because it is the Canadian Foundation for AIDS Research. We raise money to do the research. And some of those early HIV meds, CANFAR was funding the research that happened. Now, much of the research that we're doing through CANFAR is social-based, like with women's health and women's hands and HIV/AIDS home testing kits. And, in terms of selling this, it almost feels like we're coming to another stage. So it's a long way of saying I've maintained, I've been chair of the board of an HIV/AIDS organization in Alberta. I've been to the International AIDS Conference when it was in Washington, D.C. About a decade ago. And it's just a real honor to be on the CANFAR board and to try and do the best we can and continuing to push this work because we are so close. Right now is when we need the most investment. Right now is when we need to get the most antiretroviral medications to the developing world. Right now is when we need to eliminate that shame and stigma because to me, that's the real disease. But we can get into that a little bit later.
Absolutely. And you talked about two dimensions, the medical perspective, the social perspective, but you're also bringing a spiritual perspective to the table. And I think that is absolutely vital for those of us who've been doing this work for a long time. The spiritual support has been crucial for, I think, many of the people who are living with HIV and the queer community as well. So we're about to wrap up Pride Month, and one of the most exciting events that I think we've all enjoyed for many years has been church on Church Street, and that is the service that happens on the Sunday before the Pride Parade. So it looked a little different this year, obviously, but I'm just wondering, how how important has it been for MCC to really incorporate itself into the issues that we're dealing with as members of the LGBTQ2S plus community?
Yeah, I think sometimes a lot of people see, religion and science as adversarial, right? Or the LGBTQ community and religion as adversarial. And I see my role as the pastor of this largely LGBTQ congregation to really seek to bridge those worlds, right? I did a science degree and then went and did a master's of divinity. And in the same way, when I was coming out as a teenager, the church was what got me through my teen angst. I heard from the pulpit as a kid, God loves LGBTQ people. My pastor in a small town in rural Northern Ontario said that out loud. And I know that I'm unbelievably privileged. Like, I'm the first generation of people who came out in the 90s who have faced little to no homophobia in my life. Again, I'm a cisgender, white, Canadian-born, middle-class, educated man. I have about as much power and privilege as you can get in the city of Toronto. Perhaps I'm not a straight man, but even in this day and age, as a white gay man, I have a lot of power and privilege. But I recognize that that's a very unique experience, right? And that there's so much more work that needs to be done around sex positivity. And I think there's still so much shame and stigma around human sexuality. I don't just mean LGBTQ sexuality, I mean all sexuality, right? It is high time we legalize sex work in Canada to make it safe, because that will prevent HIV and AIDS and bloodborne STI transmissions. We know that. We know when sexuality is taken out of the shadows, it is safer for everyone involved, right? We need to stop criminalizing HIV and AIDS and have it not be a secret and not be shameful, because then it's more safe. And then we start normalizing conversations about our STI status and our testing status and our viral load and get rid of the serophobia and be able to have those conversations. We know U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable. So if you are HIV positive, you get tested, you get treated, you can have a normal, healthy sexuality in life. One of my daily rituals is I take a little blue pill, Truvada, which is for some people an HIV medication to keep the viral load low. And for other people, it's PrEP, pre-morning. I take that with my cup of coffee, and it's like communion, the Christian sacrament of the Eucharist, and it's my sacrament of self-care. And we need to normalize that I, as a pastor, heaven forbid, am a single gay man who has a sexuality and takes a little blue pill every day to address, either as pre-exposure prophylaxis or as an HIV medication, and normalize those conversations. So to me, the church is the perfect place to do that, right? It is, I think, one of the last bastions of community in our world, and it's meant to be non-judgmental community. Unfortunately, the Christian church is some of the most judgmental communities in the world, but it is meant to be a place where different people can come together and learn and grow from each other. So I seek to reclaim that a little bit. And I think there's just still so much opportunity and work for us to do in advocating on behalf of the LGBTQ community and building that LGBTQ community, because it's not a natural community, right? Gay men and lesbian women don't have a lot in common, but we have a common experience of oppression. And if you look at HIV and AIDS specifically, it tends to affect those communities that are most marginalized: Indigenous communities, racialized communities, women's communities, gay men and men who have sex with men communities, gay and bi men. So to me, that's like the golden opportunity for some solidarity building. And the LGBTQ community was built through the HIV AIDS epidemic, right? Queer women took care of their gay brothers while they were dying. We came together as a community, and it was an awful time, the 80s and 90s. But such a silver lining came out of that really, really difficult time.
Incredible in terms of how you were able to draw all of those parallels. Also, thank you for allowing us to understand that you are single, and we can use this as a promo video as well.
Yes, please.
One of the things that MCC is very known for is its support of gay marriage and conducting the first gay marriage in Canada. And how important do you think it is for a church to be socially active and defiant in some respects? How important is it for your work to be so engaged at a very social level of pushing the boundaries of who we can be and how we should be in society as members of the queer community?
Yeah, in 2001, before it was legalized in the Netherlands, MCC Toronto used basically a legal loophole called the reading of the banns to announce for 3 Sundays in a row that they were going to perform a wedding, and then applied for the marriage license after the fact, which allowed the government to say no, which allowed them to take it to the Superior Court of Ontario, have the laws struck down, and those marriages declared the world's first modern day same-gender marriages. And it was a gay couple and a lesbian couple that had those marriages at the start of 2011. And yeah, that was defiant. But, I think of people like Rosa Parks, right? And everybody knows Rosa Parks was on a bus, refused to give up her seat. That was not a spur of the moment decision, right? That was after months and months and years of advocacy, of meetings in church basements, of doing the hard work and the conversations about nonviolence. And it needs to be just not a surface thing. It needs to be deeply rooted. And spirituality is one of the ways we can deeply root ourselves. There's other ways of deeply rooting ourselves. And I'm what you call a universalist. I really support, I believe that there's divinity in every religious tradition and spirituality in the world. And so MCC Toronto really seeks to root ourselves. It is our core belief that each and every single perfect person is perfectly and wonderfully made. And out of that notion of this real belief that we are made in the image of God perfectly the way we are, comes this notion of human rights, that sex worker rights are human rights, that refugee rights are human rights, that HIV positive zero rights are human rights, right? And that conviction, always needs to be rooted in something. And one of my concerns is in the modern day world, we're seeing a more and more polarized debate on different issues, that's left versus right, this opinion versus that opinion. And my concern is it's not rooted on either side. My invitation to them is find those roots. Doesn't need to be through Christianity or through spirituality, but find those roots, find that community, find that church basement or community center where you can sit and have those conversations like Rosa Parks and her faith community did for months and for years, and MCC Toronto did.
Absolutely. I'm going to quote you, something that you've been quoted as saying, "We are all loved, whether we are gay, straight, indigenous, trans, cis, bi, black, new Canadian, lesbian, English speaking, deaf, tall, rich, or struggling, confident or shy, extroverted or autistic, have experienced abuse, identify as privileged or vulnerable, whether we are young or old, single or partnered, lonely or socially engaged."
Years, and MCC Toronto did.
That's a long list. It's a long list. And you've talked about your inclusiveness, your ability to engage inclusively. What do you think the stigma that many of the people on that list are experiencing is? And it's linked to HIV stigma.
That is such a great question, Notisha. And my reflection is in my position and being on boards like CANFAR, I get to meet a lot of movers and shakers in the world. And people who are incredibly wealthy and strong philanthropists. And you know what they say is, I just want somebody to love me for who I am and not for my money. And then in my congregation, I've got folks who live on social assistance, on Ontario Works, on a disability pension, on EI. And you know what they say is, I just want somebody to love me for whom I am and not how much money I have. I've met people who are actors and models who say, I want somebody to love me for who I am and not how I look. And I've met people who live with disabilities who say, I want somebody to love me for who I am and not how I look. And it's sort of this universal experience, right? All we want is love. And one of the tragedies of HIV is it's that quest for love that sometimes, makes us partake in riskier behavior. And the stigma and the shame pushes that sexuality into the shadows, which is a more risky place to be. And so to me, it's so important to honor that life's tough, life can be lonely, and we all just want love. Like it really, at the end of the day, is all about love. And the unfortunate thing is that love has become stigmatized. To me, it's take that shroud off of sexuality. And, I think going for same-gender marriage was absolutely the right move for the queer community here in Canada to make after the HIV/AIDS crisis. I think it's now time for us to talk about the next step, about polyamory, get beyond the concept of monogamy, legalize sex work, decriminalize HIV and AIDS, take that shroud off of human sexuality.
I mean, we've come an incredible far way, and I can even think about my own experience. So I do remember sitting and every week reading of the bans and holding your breath, because you're like, okay, that was week 1, week 2, week 3, what happens next? But also when we think about HIV, I started my HIV work in 1987, and at that time we'd lose all.
I won't tell you how old I was then, Notisha. I won't tell you how old I was in 1987.
I was doing some calculations there. I was like, oh, okay. But in 1987, and we would lose all of our clients. And so to see where we are now in terms of the HIV research and the work that CANFAR has absolutely led. What in closing, what are some of the big systemic issues that we are going to need to address, not just CANFAR, but across the country, in terms of the support that we need to give for the diverse LGBTQ2S plus community that you serve?
Well, to me, the biggest need, I think, in our country right now is solidarity, right? And the news has been the uncovering of children's graves at residential schools. When I served in Red Deer, Alberta, we uncovered the cemetery of an old residential school. But our Indigenous siblings need solidarity right now from non-Indigenous people, and really recognize the universality and the importance of acknowledging the land and the territories at which we are on in Canada, and that it's stolen land, right? And this month of Pride Month is also Indigenous History Month. But one of my favorite things is that World Refugee Day is June 20th, and National Indigenous Day is June 21st. So the newest Canadians, refugees and immigrants too, and the longest standing Indigenous communities of Canada, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, is the next day, and it happens during Pride Month. So that kind of solidarity between racialized communities like Indigenous communities, BIPOC communities, I think there's some really great opportunities for refugees and immigrants to build some really great bridges with Indigenous communities, because the struggle is similar, even though the experience is very different. And I think the LGBTQ community should be building those exact same bridges and making that solidarity. And there's a lot to do. There's no shortage of human rights work. But to me, it's that solidarity, because when the Indigenous community, racialized women, the LGBTQ community, and gay and bisexual and men who have sex with men come together, we can recognize that we are all the highest risk for HIV/AIDS communities and injection drug users and talk about sex work. So that's where I live and hope, and I'm seeing those bridges happening stronger and stronger.
Fantastic, Reverend Jeff Rock. It was a pleasure, an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. You had big shoes to fill to take over the role at MCC from Reverend Hawks, and I absolutely can say you have filled them. You've outgrown those shoes, and you're really taking the church and our community to a new level. So I'm really excited to see what's coming. I want to say Happy Pride. And I'll look out for your ads on those single sites. So take care.
You take care, Notisha. Have a great day.
Thank you for all that you do for CANFAR and for this country. Thank you so much.
Hey, and thank you for partnering. And I think together we can build that solidarity, Notisha.
Absolutely.